When someone's asked, who is the best modern horror filmmaker, most people would respond with James Wan, or maybe that one guy who made them It films. Though Wan is an excellent filmmaker and has crafted some of the most impactful horror films of the last few decades, there's one individual who's usually vastly overlooked. His name is Mike Flanagan. To some of you, this name may sound familiar. You may be asking yourself, oh, that's that one guy who made that one thing. Why can't I remember? Don't get yourself all worked up. I'll tell you what you may know him from. To most people, he's the Netflix horror guy whose show, The Haunting of Hill House, exploded in popularity back in 2018. Hill House was the show that put him on many viewers' radar, but this wasn't even his first Netflix venture. His film Hush, which premiered at South by Southwest in March of 2016 and came to Netflix only a month later. While James Wan has crafted well-executed jump scares, Flanagan's style leans heavier on longer, dramatic scenes that build tension over time. Hush and Hill House are great examples of this, but we'll get to them a little later on. Flanagan has a great relationship with Netflix. Since they bought his film Hush in 2016, he has made 3 other series for the service, including The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, and Midnight Mass, all of which are TV shows. Not only has he found success in his Netflix shows, Flanagan finds time to direct other amazing horror films between his acclaimed shows. These include the likes of The Mindbender Oculus, Ouija 2, Origin of Evil, the sequel to The Shining, called Dr. Sleep, and, as previously mentioned, his film Hush. We will take a closer look at most of his properties later on as we break down some of the most well-crafted scenes from Mike Flanagan's filmography. Flanagan's newest Netflix series, called Midnight Mass, was released in September of 2021. It moves away from his usual ghost-related properties and instead focuses on religion and vampires, the perfect combination. Obviously, the vampires shown in the show are a different take than the stereotypical kind, modernizing the monsters with a great Flanagan flair. As I previously stated, the show focuses heavily on Catholicism. Each episode is named after a different chapter in the Holy Bible, which the story mirrors. The gist of the story is that a small town, located on an isolated island, raises money to send their elderly preacher, known as Father Paul, on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. While there, he gets lost in the desert and finds himself in a cave, which houses a vampire. The vampire then infects him and makes him young again. Father Paul, thinking this is an angel sent by God, brings the gift back to his town, where the chaos ensues. The first clip that we'll be talking about takes place in episode 4, titled Lamentations. This scene is unlike any that Flanagan has ever produced, an extreme long-take conversation between 2 people in love discussing what death means to each of them. While long takes are a staple of Flanagan's signature style, this one has much less visual flair than his other oneers. Don't get me wrong, this isn't a bad thing in the slightest. By having this deeply emotional scene shot this way forces the audience to face the same uncomfortable subject matter that the characters are. Death isn't something people like to think about. Questioning one's mortality can be extremely uncomfortable and can lead to a kind of existential crisis. This scene has no cuts, as the characters dive deep into what they really think what happens to them after they die. The main characters, Riley and Aaron, have deeply different views. Riley has a more pessimistic view, which focuses on the biology of what actually happens to a human body, while Aaron's is much more optimistic.
When I die, my body stops functioning. Shut down. All at once or gradually. My breathing stops, my heart stops beating. Clinical death. But in the meantime, in between, maybe my brain releases a flood of DMT. It's a psychedelic drug released when we dream, so I dream. I dream bigger than I have ever dreamed before because it's all of it. Just the last dump of DMT all at once, and my neurons are firing, and I'm seeing this firework display of memories and imagination, and I am just tripping. Really tripping balls, because my mind's rifling through the memories, long and short term, and the dreams mixed with the memories, and it's a curtain call. Dream to end all dreams. One last great dream as my mind empties the fucking missile silos, and then I stop.
Her body as it would have been on her best day on Earth. Her perfect age, the peak of herself. And they tell her about her mom down here on Earth and how I'll be there soon enough. And she's happy. Had nothing but joy for all eternity. And she's loved. And she isn't alone. And that's what we mean when we say heaven. No mansions, no rivers of diamonds or fluffy clouds or angel wings. You are loved. And you aren't alone.
These two characters have a will they won't they dynamic during the entire show, and this is one of their first times that they are actually opening up to one another. Later in the show, spoiler alert, Riley is turned into a vampire by Father Paul. Long story short, Riley doesn't want to be a vampire. So early in the morning, he takes Erin out on a boat ride. When they get far enough out into the water, he brings their conversation back up and confesses to her that he's had a change of heart.
What do I want? I want you to take this boat and row to the mainland and leave this place and never look back. But I knew you wouldn't do that. I knew you wouldn't believe any of this unless you saw. I want you to run. But I believe you're gonna row back there and do everything you can to try and save them. I'm just so sorry you have to see this. I love you, Aaron Green. I love you my whole life. One way or another.
I love you too.
I did my best. I did my best.
He then turns to dust. He gives his life to show her the danger that she's in by being on the island. A final act of love from our protagonist Riley. A deeply touching one, in fact. Flanagan does an amazing job of tackling the subject matter of death. Riley's perspective on death, as he's about to die, is deeply beautiful. I was incredibly touched when viewing this scene for the first time, and who am I kidding? It chokes me up every time after viewing. The Haunting of Bly Manor is a really interesting series from Mike Flanagan. Being the first thing he had done after the phenomenal success of The Haunting of Hill House, people had really high expectations. The show opts to have a much slower story than Hill House, and many less scares, usually having shadowy characters looming in the background of dialogue-heavy scenes, or ending an episode on a giant jump scare. Bly Manor is in a category of its own. The story focuses on the manor itself, cursed by a ghostly figure named the Lady of the Lake, who acts as a spirit gravity well, cursing anyone who dies on the property to haunt the manor. One of the most spectacular scenes in the series comes in the final episodes when the story of the Lady in the Lake is finally told. Her name is Viola Willoughby, the original owner of the manor, who got sick as she was giving birth to her only child. Because of her sickness, Viola was isolated from the rest of her family. Her sister offered to help raise Viola's daughter. Viola, being extremely strong-willed, lived far longer than she was supposed to with the sickness. She developed a hatred for her sister, who, over time, stole her husband, her only child, and her home. Being fed up of taking care of Viola, her sister decides to do the unthinkable. She murders Viola and thus curses all of Bly Manor for the next 400 years. While not being my favorite series of Flanagan's, I do find the last few episodes to be very moving. I highly encourage that you all go watch and experience the ending spoiler-free, as it's definitely worth it, as the ending is the best part of the entire show. Dr. Sleep is a 2019 film that is a sequel to the critically acclaimed The Shining. The film follows a grown-up Dan Torrance who finds himself struggling with alcoholism due to the traumatic events that he endured as a child in the Overlook Hotel. His hope for a peaceful existence soon becomes shattered when he meets a young Abra, a teen who shares his extrasensory gift to shine. Together they form an unlikely alliance to battle the True Knot, a cult whose members try to feed off the shine of innocence to become immortal. The film works as an excellent second chapter to The Shining by widening the world of the first. This film serves as Flanagan's first true venture into big-budget filmmaking. With a large budget of $45 million, this film was a real step up from Flanagan's other projects, which averaged around $1 to $5 million budgets. Dr. Sleep was a critical success, but it failed to bring average audiences into the seats, drawing only $72 million worldwide. Due to its larger budget, this film has much less of a Flanagan's cinematic flair. The film is still absolutely stunning, but it's obvious that he didn't have full control. The fact that this film is also a continuation of an already established IP hindered Flanagan's vision. Even with all these roadblocks, Flanagan still delivered an incredibly beautiful film that I, personally, found extremely satisfying. A stunning scene that we're going to be looking at from Dr. Sleep is when a young Abra tricks the main bad guy, named Rose the Hat, into letting her into her mind and gathering information. The scene flips the script on what would be typically a run-of-the-mill villain intimidates the young hero stereotype, but what actually happens is a complete reversal when the young child shows their power and intimidates the villain instead. Let's break it down together. The scene starts with Rose using her powers to search the world for Abra. The cinematography during Rose's astral projection is absolutely stunning. Showing her actively searching and sensing like a predator on the hunt makes her all the more frightening. When she enters Abra's room, she then starts searching her mind for information on where she lives. The predator then springs the trap. Abra traps Rose's hand in a metaphorical bear trap, also known as a filing cabinet. Abra enters Rose's cathedral mind, trying to find any information that can help her and Dan defeat them. This scene is just so well done, and is such a reversal from what we usually see in these types of films. By having our protagonist outclass the villain in this way delivers a feeling that most films usually can't. This scene has such an amazing sense of visual storytelling that I can watch it over and over again without fail. Hush is a truly special film in my heart. Not only was it my first introduction to the great Flanagan, but it is also deeply unique. The film follows a deaf-mute author named Maddie, who lives in the middle of the woods, utterly alone. Yes, I know, an excellent setup for a stellar slasher movie. Now, while that may sound a bit cliche, there are two real twists on the classic slasher formula. One, the final girl is deaf and mute. This makes her have to rely on her other senses and sharp mind. While the second is the killer himself. In the first 15 minutes of the film, we see him testing Maddie and figuring out about her disabilities. He wants to scare her. He's doing this for the thrill of the chase. So he lets himself known to Maddie by taking her phone, snapping a few pictures of her throughout her house, and then sending them back to her on her laptop. He reveals himself to her, letting her know that he can get into the house whenever he wants, and to make sure that she has fun. These first 15 minutes are some of the most tense I've ever felt while watching a film, and it never lets up. Flanagan's style gels perfectly with this tense, slow burn story archetype. The film also leans on dramatic irony. The audience always knows something the protagonist doesn't because we can hear what she can't. When a door opens, we recoil, but she doesn't due to her lack of hearing. This perfectly crafts an insane amount of tension within the audience. The scene in this film that stands out the most has to be when Maddie meets the killer for the first time. This whole interaction has so many different layers, as both the killer and Maddie are sizing each other up and trying to survive. There are two great examples of this. Maddie writes on the sliding glass window, "Haven't seen your face, won't tell a soul." And the killer's response is to take his mask off and clearly present his face to her, letting her know that she's not getting out of this alive. The other great example is when she tells him that her boyfriend is coming home soon, but the killer has already gone through her phone and knows about her relationship difficulties. He then replies to her by quoting a message she sent to her ex, begging him to come back. Hush is an incredibly crafted film and still stands as one of Flanagan's best. The Haunting of Hill House, the one and only. Mike Flanagan's original Netflix series. The show is full of amazing characters and stunning cinematography. Not to mention its unbelievable plot. Hill House is one of, if not the best, of Flanagan's creations. Releasing on Netflix in 2018, the show follows the Crane family who grew up and lost their mother in the Hill House. The episodes flash forward and back, showing us the characters' childhoods in the house and what they are doing in the modern day. Each one of the children are dealing with their own issues, both in the past and the present, that all culminate together in the end. Slowly, over the course of the show, we learn what happens on the night that they all left the house, the night that their mother died. The scene we will be focusing on focuses on the youngest of the Crane family, named Nell. Back in her childhood, she was haunted by this figure that she called the Bent Neck Lady. After leaving the house, she would still see the figure, which would cause her massive sleep paralysis. In our scene, halfway through the series, Nell is called back to the Hill House, where she's met with apparitions mimicking her perfect family. She also sees her dead husband, who she dances with. But then we have a hard cut to what's actually going on. She's dancing through the decrepit house, utterly alone. Finally, she sees her mother, who places the necklace around her neck, and
it's yours now. Time to wake up, sweetheart.
She was her own nightmare all along. This absolutely stunning reveal is just excellent storytelling by Mike Flanagan and his team, and it's also utterly heartbreaking, as the character of Nell was the heart and soul of the entire show. Her death sparks the entire Crane family to finally get back together and end the curse of the Hill House for good. The image of Nell dropping over and over again into the past, where she was the bent neck lady, is brilliantly crafted and is one of the most insane reveals in all of horror cinema. The Haunting of Hill House is one of the most beautifully crafted horror series I have ever seen, and that's all thanks to Mike Flanagan's spectacular work.